Welcome to Saga Thing, where we're putting the sagas of the Icelanders on trial. I'm John.
And I'm Andy. In each episode, we pick a saga, discuss the story, and judge the narrative at the Saga Thing.
Right, only we don't really do all that in each episode.
No, not lately we don't. We seem to be completely incapable of covering a summary, discussion, and judgments all in like the single hour we've given ourselves.
Well, I mean, we may have become increasingly long-winded, but it's nothing to be ashamed of, I've decided.
No. Okay, good.
I prefer to think of it as the natural progression of podcasts. They seem to grow beyond the original scope or boundaries set in their initial episodes.
Sure. Well, it's either that or we need to seriously get ourselves under control at some point, don't you think?
As I said, I prefer to think of it as a natural progression.
Okay. Well, either way, it means a lot more Saga Thing for our listeners, which I hope is, I hope it's acceptable to them.
I think it's quite acceptable.
Me too.
I think we should just have come up with a better numbering system. This A and B stuff is hurting our overall total. Yeah. This is 11B we're doing today, but I think it's actually our 20th episode.
Yes, it is, in fact. Congratulations on our 20th episode, John.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good numbers for a podcast on Icelandic sagas as well. Far more than I thought we would.
Yeah, absolutely. It's bizarre. Thank you for all of our loyal listeners for sticking with us. What are you drinking from?
What? Oh, this is my Saga Thing beer mug.
Oh, you don't say. I wish I had one of those.
John, I told you yesterday that I'm sending you one for... Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, I get it. All right, I'll play along.
Work with me here.
Well, John, you too can enjoy a cold beer from your very own Saga Thing beer mug.
Now you're getting it. Try to sound more natural. Oh, really? How?
Well, you just get on your internet and go to sagathingpodcast.spreadshirt.com.
Why, there's a Saga Thing store, you say?
Yes, there is. We've got shirts, mugs, and even a fancy tote bag for all your Saga book carrying needs.
Why, that's wonderful. I think I'll log on now and order myself a few items.
Sure. Now, all proceeds, which are extremely minimal, let me tell you, they go to supporting the podcast.
Why, I think I'll build a link to the Saga Thing store on our website, sagathingpodcast.wordpress.com.
Gee, John, that would be a great idea. I mean... It's about time you started contributing something around here.
What? Oh, I guess the commercial is over?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I feel a little dirty after that.
Yeah, wash the shame away with another drink and let's move on to the judgments.
I can do that. Excellent.
Yeah. Now, okay, we're assuming that if you're listening to this second part of our discussion of Kormak Saga, you've probably already heard our summary of the plot.
And if you haven't, feel free to pause this episode, go back, and get an earful of episode 11A, where you'll learn far more than you ever wanted to know about Kormak Ogmundarson, and his love for Steingerd of the Lovely Feet.
Is that what you're calling her?
Yeah, although I did consider Steingerd of the Unsurpassed Instep for a moment.
Okay.
But if you can't be bothered, then you can follow the basic pattern of the warrior poet saga and feel pretty comfortable with what's going on. We've got a young, unruly poet who falls in love with a beautiful maiden. Her father gets angry about all the visits and tries to force a marriage proposal.
Or in this case, he asks the local witches' sons to try and kill the unwanted suitor.
Sure. And whatever happens, we know the poet won't get the girl, she'll marry someone else, the poet will travel around and meet some kings, and then he'll come back and try to get the girl again, probably fail, then die in some magnificent way.
Like being crushed underneath a Scottish giant.
Yeah. Is there any more fantastic way to die?
Yes. But I grant you it's unusual.
Yeah.
And then as always, we have 7 categories in our judgment section. Mm-hmm. Best bloodshed, body count, nicknames, notable witticisms, outlawry, thingman, and final ratings.
Now, that always seems like a lot to me, but I wouldn't mind pausing for a moment before we start, so...
Pausing?
Yeah.
What have we been doing? We've done banter, we've done commercials,
yeah.
We've done Warrior Poet Saga formulas.
That's what they come here for.
Yeah, the only thing we haven't done yet is actually move into the episode.
Well, I just prefer to see it as a natural progression, John. A natural progression.
Okay, so what's this pause all about?
Well, I think we wrapped up our summary without getting the chance to discuss some of the things that I think we should touch on before jumping into those judgments.
Like what?
Like, I want to talk about the whole issue of Thorveig's curse.
Okay. So for those of you who don't remember, Thorveig is the witch whose sons are killed trying to prevent Kormak from seeing Steingerd.
Right, and when she confronts Kormak about this, he not only tells her that she'll get no compensation, he's also going to force her out of the district.
Which is kind of a harsh way to comfort a mourning mother.
I don't think he had any intention of comforting her.
No, of course not. But she retaliates by cursing Kormak's love through sorcery, claiming that he'll never enjoy Steingerd's love.
Exactly. He tells her that she'll have little say in the matter, but the saga seems to suggest that the curse is quite effective, or at least that's the way it's often read.
Okay, wait, so you have questions about the curse?
Yeah. I mean, when I read it again, the saga, it just doesn't really make that big a deal out of the curse.
It's true. I mean, it does mention it a few times. When Kormak and Steingerd are all set to be married, the saga says that Thorveig had worked a spell so that they wouldn't be able to enjoy each other's love. Which
is presumably, I guess, why he stands her up at the altar.
Presumably.
Mm-hmm. But I guess what bugs me, John, is that I don't want to blame Kormak's ultimate failure to entice or secure Steingerd on Thorveig's spell alone.
Well, I mean, we know that witches' curses can be powerful in the sagas, so we can't just discount the premise. I mean, do you want to reject it because you think it's lame, or is there something else you think is going on here?
Both, I guess. I mean, I can see how the author might think the cursed love affair might work, especially if he's influenced by continental romances.
Oh, yeah, I think he and the other Warrior Poet Saga authors are definitely playing with the romance tradition.
Right, but it doesn't quite match up as nicely as I'd like it to, you know?
I'm sure the author would be very hurt by that.
Sorry, author. But I'll probably say worse about the author's saga once we get to the final rating, so you may not want to listen to this Kormak saga author. But let me put it this way. Are you comfortable blaming everything here on the witch, or is it possible that the saga author has other interests at play?
Well, those are two different questions. I mean, the spell is a big deal, and it does seem to affect things, but I would agree. Excuse me, Kormak seems to get in his own way more often than not. And I don't necessarily think that's the result of a curse.
Exactly. I mean, his dirty, erotic love poetry is not, as far as I know, inspired by Thorveig, right? Mm-hmm. Kormak's just a filthy-minded guy who doesn't quite know how to seal the deal with Steingerd.
Well, I mean, there's no question that he lacks Hallfred's charm and skill at seducing a lady. But there's more going on here than just Kormak's crudeness. We also have to consider the social implications of the affair between them.
Yeah, I mean, isn't Kormak from a better family? Aren't there, like, class issues at play here?
Yeah, he is. We spoke about this briefly in the summary section, but there are some class issues going on in this saga. There's a critical reading of the text that looks at the failed relationship as the result of social pressures.
Okay, now that seems more likely. That's more what I'm interested in.
Okay, but let's not discount the power of sorcery in the sagas, at least at the narrative level. Mm-hmm. And yet there is something to this class issue. Kormak is from an established and well-to-do family, and it wouldn't be at all surprising if his own family pressured him to move on from his interest in Steingerd, since her family is less well-off and is not on the same sort of social plane as his.
Yeah, but we never really see any of that in the saga. Mm-hmm. All we see is Kormak's weird behavior and Steingerd's constant rejection of his advances, especially after that episode at the altar.
Right.
And for what it's worth, he doesn't ever seem to be terribly interested in marrying her. At least that's the way I read it. He just seems to want to have sex with her.
Which he never actually does, as far as we know.
No, he doesn't.
This isn't Hallfred's saga, where Hallfred actually manages to bet his love.
Yeah, multiple times. He's quite the goer.
But Steingerd has more spirit, and she isn't just going to let Kormak have his way because he wants it.
True, but not enough spirit to keep herself from getting married off to Bersi the Dueller.
Well, but it's not like she had a choice in the matter. I'm not sure we should blame her for getting swept away by the sort of unforgiving betrothal customs of Saga Age Iceland.
No, absolutely not. I mean, she wasn't even asked about the marriage to Bersi. Her father, Thorkel, just married her off without asking, which I think is actually one of the more interesting and teachable moments in this saga.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not sure this saga offers so much to teach as some of the other warrior poet sagas we've covered, but Steingerd's character does offer some useful examples for discussing marriage customs in saga literature.
Right. But on the negative side, we've got Steingerd being forced into a marriage without her consent. I guess on the positive side, if you want to look at the other angle, we see that she, like a lot of male characters in the saga, has a strong sense of honor, and she doesn't take slights to that honor very lightly.
Yeah, I mean, after Bersi's gruesome buttocks injury, she doesn't hesitate to assert herself and divorce him, for example. And in fact, I think she uses the fairly flimsy pretense of his injury to force the issue. And all of this suggests that there are ways and times when a woman in Saga Age Iceland can assert herself and has the power to determine her own fate, but sometimes it looks as if marriage arrangements aren't always one of those times.
Yeah. And this is an issue we see quite often in medieval literature. So I guess if you're interested in the history of marriage, the literature of the Middle Ages has a lot to offer.
Sure.
So we shouldn't forget how all of this affects poor Bersi either. I mean, I always find myself feeling kind of bad for him.
You know, why's that?
Well, I mean, the poor guy just got his rear end sliced open down to the back of his knee.
Okay,
you know?
right, at that moment.
Yeah, and while he's recovering, his wife calls him Arse Bersi and leaves him. This seems kind of harsh to me.
All right, but we have to remember that she never wanted to be with him, so this is kind of a positive outcome.
Sure it is, from her perspective, but just think of poor Bersi. He was tricked into marrying her by Narfi, remember?
Narfi. I know. Yeah, Narfi told him there were no obstacles to the marriage.
Yeah, and then Bersi marries her, defends her honor against Kormak, and then he ends up with his backside carved up in a duel. And rather than thank him for taking care of her, this woman humiliates him and abandons him.
Well, he should probably choose his wife better next time around. Maybe do a little research before he gets married.
I guess research does pay off, students.
Yeah. Okay, you realize this is supposed to be the judgment section, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll get to that in just a second.
Yeah. How about now?
No, I still haven't gotten your thoughts on the sorcery issue.
What have we been talking about?
Haven't we just been summarizing and digressing?
Okay. Let's get this out of the way quickly so we can do our judgments already.
All right. So, sorcery or not?
All right. Now I have to think of an answer. I'm not sure we need to explain away either factor completely. Kormak's failure to marry Steingerd can be explained without recourse to magic, whether that's because of class issues or because Kormak just gets a case of cold feet. But we need to consider the possibility that either Kormak's family or independent observers might comprehend a magical influence over his decision to void the marriage. Alternatively, it's possible that Thorveig's curse is just a convenient narrative device to explain away what is otherwise some fairly objectionable behavior on the part of the saga's hero. Either way, it fits nicely into saga logic that a failed marriage, especially one that's at the heart of the story, can be blamed on malign and maybe supernatural influences. So, what do you think?
Well, I think you're kind of being wishy-washy saying it's both there, but...
I said we don't have to explain away either one of them. It's not the same thing.
Okay. Well, I guess I really want to think that the sorcery isn't the cause of the problem, mainly because I kind of find the social and political issues in sagas much more fascinating. But in this case, I think we may be grasping at straws if we do that. I think you pointed out before, I can't remember if it was in this episode or somewhere else, but Kormak's saga is one of those sagas that's even more deeply influenced by continental romance sources than most sagas, even most other poet sagas. And I get the distinct feeling that this curse is something like the reverse of the love potion that brings Tristan and Isolde together. The curse and the potion, they obviously do different things, but they have a similar effect on the narrative. We get two lovers who presumably want to be together, but they're doomed by other circumstances never to enjoy one another's company. And I think Bjarni Einarsson makes a very big deal out of these parallels. I don't think that the Tristan narrative has to be the source for Kormak's failed love affair, but there's definitely a romance literature influence at play here. Now, I wish that wasn't the case, or maybe... I guess I don't need it to be purely social or political is what I'm saying here. I just need it to be cohesive, engaging, and cleverly written. And in the case of Kormak's saga, I don't think any of those things occurred, do they? But I guess that's my final rating, and I should shut up and let you steer us to calmer waters here.
So your answer is to criticize the author for his narrative stylings rather than to actually answer the question.
I guess that's what I did there, yes.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the sorcery is the big issue. I just really don't want it to be.
Right. All right. I'll take that. Let's move on to our first category.
Can I do just one more quick...
First category. Best bloodshed. All right, best bloodshed. We've got a few good options here. Nothing like a charnel house or anything, but a few options that we can make something out of. I'm going to start us off. I'm going to nominate the first act of violence, or the first described act of violence in the saga, which is Kormak's father, Ogmund, fighting a duel against a raider named Osmund Ashsides.
Well, that's right.
And lopping off his leg in the duel.
I remember I was excited about this because we hadn't had a saga with a bloodshed in the first couple pages recently.
It's true.
This one came right out of the gate with some leg lopping.
So this is a couple. I'll just briefly read this to us. Ogmund went to the duel, as did Ashmund, and they fought. The Viking presented his side, but nothing could pierce him. Thus, presumably, the nickname Ashsides. Then Ogmund swiftly raised his sword, shifted it about in his hands, and struck off Asmund's leg. He took 3 marks of gold in duel ransom.
Pretty good. Well, we've seen a lot of legs getting cut off.
We have.
It is a standard strategy, I guess, for the dueler or in battle to just swing low. Swing low and
chariot. I really like to know, I don't really have, maybe I've just lived far too clean and pretty of a life, but I have no idea what kind of muscle is involved in lopping off somebody's leg. Well, I imagine I'd like to know sort of how likely it is that these sort of sweeping blows that lop off somebody's leg would be this frequent.
Well, as you know, I used to practice Japanese swordsmanship back in graduate school. And
yeah.
Yeah?
Yes, I believe that's how I would describe it. You practiced.
I did. It's part of why my left hand doesn't work quite right anymore.
Right.
Anyway, but one of the things that we did was try to cut through rolled up mats soaked in water because they were supposed to be the closest equivalent to cutting through a body or a part of a body. And I can tell you, if you don't swing just right, the sword doesn't go through. But if you have your technique down and you swing quick and sharp and you know what you're doing, you can cut through that limb pretty easily.
Well, I think also the blacksmithing techniques for swords in medieval Iceland and medieval Scandinavia in general, they tended to be thicker, heavier weapons. I mean, the edge of the weapon was almost incidental. Right? It was almost the weight and heft of the weapon that did most of the damage. Right. You see a number of these duels where someone is magically protected, quote unquote, but Kormak, for example, is still able to defeat Thorveig in a duel by breaking his ribs with his sword, right? By just sort of hammering at him with the blade.
Yeah, maybe he should have sharpened it before he got there.
Well, or maybe he should have killed the witch instead and then not have to deal with the problem.
That might help. That might help.
But right, so yeah. So I want to probably not a winner, but I thought it was worth pointing out.
Well, anytime someone gets a leg chopped off, that's always worth pointing out. One of the things that we liked most about the saga, I think both of us, is Bersi's injury in his duel with Steinar. Steinar is one of Kormak's kinsmen. They're having a duel, and Kormak is acting as the second. And during this duel, Kormak raises the shield, and that gives Steinar an opening. And so Steinar strikes at Bersi. It says he hit the shield rim with his sword, which glanced off the shield and onto Bersi's buttocks and slid down along his thighs to the hollows of his knees, so that it stuck in the bone. And there Bersi fell.
That just sounds awful.
It sounds gruesome and awful.
Yeah.
Obviously, anytime someone gets stabbed or cut in the buttocks in the sagas, it is a shameful thing to have happen.
Right, but I mean, just even looking at the physicality of it. I mean, a sword cutting deeply from the buttocks around the thighs to the hollow of the knees. I mean, that's potentially a fatal injury. I mean, it's it's kind of thing. Unless you're very lucky, that severs a couple of arteries.
Well, and it obviously is a grave injury for him, and he's laid up for quite a while. And this is one of the reasons that his wife divorces him. She sees him as less of a man. Again, going back to that whole "you were stabbed in the buttocks" things, maybe you're homosexual, other kind of connotations that go with it. She looks at him as less than a man,
and rather cruelly divorces him by naming him Arse Bersi,
right?
Because of his injury, which is it's rough.
She's a harsh woman, but she never wanted to be married to him in the first place, and so this is a good out for her. So it's a very significant moment. It's a very bloody, violent moment. Very worth considering for best bloodshed.
Now, of course, that's a good one, but I have to look at our best moment of animal cruelty in this saga and seriously consider its potential as a bloodshed moment. Okay. This happens as Kormak and his brother Thorgils are leaving Iceland on a lengthy voyage. And when the brothers put out, this is just me from the saga now, when the brothers put out from their place of anchorage, a walrus surfaced beside the ship. Excellent.
I don't know if that's what a walrus sounds like.
That's what Chewbacca sounds like, but it's pretty close. Kormak fired a weighted staff at it, hitting the animal so that it sank. People thought they recognized Thorveig's eyes when they saw it.
That's always the eyes.
The animal did not surface from then on, and it was reported of Thorveig that she was dangerously ill, and people say that she died as a result. It seems like you live in a very different world in the sagas, where you have to pay attention to the eyes of random wild animals to determine whether or not they are in fact the fetch of a witch.
Well, they are the window to the soul.
Well, that's fair enough. But so you've got, in this case, a witch choosing a walrus to try to keep an eye on our hero. Did
she choose the walrus, or did the walrus choose her?
I don't actually know how this works. Is this like the Patronus in Harry Potter? Do you sort of get what you get?
Yeah. Well, it speaks to her spirit. Her inner self is a
inner self is a betusked, obese sea mammal.
That's what I'm guessing. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Anyway,
what do you got?
I want to add in the death of Kormak. Kormak versus the giant. Sure. Yeah. Partly because I just love the Scottish giant that comes out of nowhere, quite literally. Just he's in Scotland and out of a forest, a giant rushes towards him. I think the saga author needed a convenient way to wrap things up. He's like,
I think so.
I don't know what to do.
We're just sort of importing random bits of folklore at this point.
Right. So the saga reads, on one occasion after they had been raiding, Kormak was pursuing the enemy as they fled. But his troops had gone to the ship, and then a giant, whom the Scots worshipped as an idol, came out of a forest. They worshipped this giant as an idol.
Sure.
This just sounds crazy.
Presumably from a distance.
Yeah. He came out of the forest in pursuit of Kormak, and a bitter struggle ensued. Of the two, Kormak was the weaker, of course. The giant had more of a troll's strength. Kormak felt for his sword, but it had slipped from his scabbard. He stretched out his hand for it and struck the giant his death blow. The giant gripped Cormac's side so firmly, however, that his ribs broke, and Kormak fell with the dead giant on top of him. And he could not get up.
Right.
And so Kormak, he has a little bit of a moment to compose some poems, but he does succumb to the injury.
Yeah, now it's been suggested that this is an element of Celtic influence on the saga. That we're dealing with a moment when the saga author really is kind of just operating outside the traditions of the Icelandic sagas, and is importing materials to kind of give a sort of sense of verisimilitude to the fact that this is happening abroad. Right? These are the kinds of stories that get told among the Celts and Scots, and so
we see a lot of
story to tell for someone who dies there.
Celtic giants running out of forests, worshipped as idols. I don't remember that in the Mabinogion.
No.
Or the Toyne. I don't remember.
Right. No, it's a fairly unique idea. But it's certainly, I would say this, it doesn't appear in Norse mythology very often. Okay. And so the Celts are sort of the obvious default.
Okay. We should throw in one more. It's not really a bloodshed, but it's an almost bloodshed. Are we allowed to consider those?
Almost bloodshed?
Almost bloodshed, but it's an interesting one.
We can almost consider it. How's that?
I only really want to bring it up because we didn't bring it up in the summary section. So this episode occurs when Steingerd has been abducted by the Vikings and Kormak has come to save her. And they kind of rescue her from this ship, and they have to dive off the ship after killing the bridegroom. It says Thorgils, who is helping Kormak, plunged into the water with Steingerd and swam to land. So now Thorgils and Steingerd are safe. So Kormak, like Beowulf, has a much more difficult journey through the water. It says, when Kormak was near land, some eels attacked him, slithering over his hands and feet so that he was pulled down. And then
how did we skip this in the original summary of the
I don't
saga?
know. And honestly, the only thing that comes to mind when I read that is, those are the sounds of the shrieking eels. And Kormak even composes a verse.
For those of you who wonder if this podcast is a suitable replacement for actually reading the sagas, the answer is no.
No.
And it's because we tend to skip over little moments like this.
And we're not even very good at what we do.
The sagas are just full of stuff like this. Well, yes, we're also just incompetent. But the idea here is to get you interested enough to go read them for yourself, because that way you learn about things like the shrieking eels of Cormac's saga.
Right. So I don't think that there's a lot of bloodshed there, but they do slither over his hands, and maybe that's not going to be a winner.
Right. For me, it comes down to either Bersi's buttocks or the giant.
Yeah, it's definitely Bersi's buttocks or the giant. Obviously, Bersi's buttocks are it's a more violent episode. and it's more significant to the narrative. But how can you pass up a Scottish giant?
Yeah, it's so random that I can't decide if that makes me want to reward it or want to punish it. We get 64 pages into a 66-page saga without any reference to giants of any sort,
Right.
only to have one randomly run out of the woods to kill our hero.
Well, it takes a Scottish giant to kill a Cormac, you know?
Well, that's
Speaks
fair.
to his prowess as a hero. And
right.
We get a double bloodshed there because Cormac does kill the giant, even though he was the weaker of the two. And then the giant crushes his ribs and falls on top of him. I think that's a good winner. We're going to see plenty more
I can live with
buttock
that.
slicing and buttock stabbing in the future. Let's
Right.
give this one to Cormac and the giant.
You know what? I'm comfortable with that. I think that Scottish giant needs to be rewarded.
Aye, Johnny, thank you very much for that.
Oh dear God! I was really hoping we could avoid that.
I'll put it on my mantle. Oh, I turned Irish
What?
there.
What?
Oh, I'll put it on my mantle. It'll look great.
The-
Right next to me shillelagh.
Oh dear God! We'll be waiting for anti-defamation letters from both the Hibernian Society and the Sons of Scotland. All right. Well, the Scottish Giant wins an award. Congratulations. Body count.
Yeah. Body count.
Body count? You know, the amazing thing is I can read the book Fox and Socks to my kid, and I can't get through like a line of this thing.
I know. I love that book, by the way.
Oh, my God.
Any hoozy. So the body count for this saga is not so high, but not too low. We've
Not
had
shameful,
lower.
not embarrassing.
It's just that the problem is that Cormac just doesn't get around to killing as many people as he really should.
That's right. In fact, I don't really, aside from sort of a whirlwind tour of Ireland, he doesn't really rack up much of a body count himself at all. It's just the saga provides him with a certain amount of death.
Yeah. So I think the number that we arrived at with some controversy was 24.
Or possibly 22. And we'll get
Exactly.
to
Well, therein lies the controversy. John and I keep going back and forth on this thing of what do we mean by body count. I have it as an unnatural or untimely, I think is the phrase that I like best, untimely death. And,
right. I think,
so that
I, think
way
I
when
would
people...
probably come down. I would come down in favor of unnatural, but I would be against untimely.
I think untimely is more interesting just because it means we weren't expecting it. So in this case, the two people we're struggling over is Ogmund, that is Cormac's father. He had a wife named Helga and a son named Frodi before he ever came to Iceland. And right before the journey, I think it is, Helga and Frodi fall ill and die. John sees that as natural because a disease or an illness is a natural occurrence.
Right. I don't think you can consider something unnatural when a sort of infant dies of whatever plague or famine or whatever it is passes through. It's not terribly, I mean, it's tragic, but it's not terribly uncommon for a young mother and an infant son to pass away in this time period.
No, but it is untimely, and it does affect the course of this saga's narrative, which I think is important and worth considering. If Helga and Frodi don't die, then Ogmund never marries his wife Dala, and then Cormac and Thorgils, his brother, are never born. So I think that's worth considering.
All right, so let's put those to one side for now, because the rest of the saga we agree on.
Yes, we do.
We've got 22 other deaths. A number of deaths actually due to Bersi the Dueller. Bersi's got almost as high a body count as Cormac does himself.
Yeah, and a little later on he brags about his lifetime numbers of 36 or something like that.
Right, only a few of which we see in this saga. So unfortunately we don't get to count the entire 36.
Something tells me that Bersi should have his own saga, and that he's really I don't want to give everything away, but he's kind of the star of this saga.
I would tend to agree. I mean,
we've got a lot of Cormac poems, but Bersi's the one that actually does stuff.
And of course, even the saga author, it's almost as if he can't tear himself away from Bersi. That we end up following Bersi for the rest of his life before
I'm not even sure if
the saga
that's it.
returns to Cormac.
I just wonder if he didn't have enough Kormak material to work with, and so he's like, I got to fill this thing out a little bit, so I'm going to throw in these Bersi things that I've got. And he's clearly building off poems there as well, because he kind of screws some of those up. Yes.
But so we have a handful of men killed in duels with Bersi. We have Thorin the Mighty and his 3 sons, whom Bersi kills in a raid to rescue a young lady. And then we've got Cormac's killings in Ireland, where he kills 9 Irish warriors. He does kill Narfi, which I think should count twice, just because I hated him so much.
I wish Narfi survived this one.
And, of course, he kills a Scottish giant. But ultimately, and of course Cormac himself is killed by the Scottish giant, so he counts as well. And so we have a grand total of 22 plus Helga and Frodi, if we decide we're counting those. There are also a couple of kind of moments when we decided we couldn't count things, even though there's some pretty clear evidence of other deaths in these sagas. There's a reference to Cormac, his brother Thorgils, and their friend Sigurd the German overcoming 11 men who attacked them. But overcome, that's unclear. That's ambiguous. Right? Whether they are
you just have a bunch of guys groaning on the battlefield.
Exactly. We're told in the early going in the saga that Osmond Ashside, his men are killed in great numbers.
It's a lot of people, but who knows?
Right, but how many? We can't say.
I always feel like we should have like a credit there, like we'll give you 10 for a great number of men were killed or something. But then we're just making stuff up, so we can't do that.
22 or 24 with an asterisk, depending on
or
whether
just
you prefer,
24,
or that, depending on whether you prefer Andy's way of counting deaths in the sagas or mine. Feel free to let us know, by the way.
From now on, it's always going to be Andy's version or John's version.
Right. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong
kind of
with
sad.
that, particularly as long as we make sure that mine's in there so that we have it right.
I'm the one that edits the thing, so we'll just go with 24.
Oh, wow.
So, 24 deaths.
22 or 24, possibly 23.
24 deaths.
Nicknames.
So, in this section, we like to look at the more interesting nicknames of the saga. And, John, you're usually in charge of that. So, what did you come up with this time?
All right. Well, this is actually a pretty good saga for nicknames, which on first reading I didn't think it was. Some of them are kind of well hidden, but when you go through it again, you pull them all out. There's quite a pile. There's a number of names in the saga that are pretty straightforward. Finna the Fair, Steinvor the Slender-Legged, Bork the Stout, or nicknames that don't really count, like Steinar calling himself Glum for a brief moment, which is really just a pseudonym, not really a nickname. There's also a fair number of people who don't get nicknames, including Cormac himself. But we still have plenty to work with.
Okay, so who's up first?
So first up, I'm going to put Harold Greycloak.
Why?
It's possibly one of the dullest nicknames of all time.
Well, yeah, you just went through this list of people whose nicknames were fairly obvious, and then now your first big nickname to impress us with is Harold Greycloak. But
I think the point here is that his nickname is sort of boring. You have to remember that this guy's lineage, he is the son of Eric the Bloodaxe and Gunhild, the Mother of Kings. He's the nephew of Harold Bluetooth and a grandson of Harold Fairhair.
Yeah, he is impressive.
As Norwegian royalty goes, it's a tough list to beat, and yet when you get to him, it's Harold Greycloak.
Yeah.
It's not a terribly exciting name, and I think we're meant to understand a certain something about him from a name like that.
All right, well, let's move on to the next one then.
Viggy the Shapeshifter.
That's one I like.
This is a frustrating name because I want more to go on here. The name itself is Hamrami, which can mean either shapeshifter or berserk. The overlap of those two concepts is fascinating when you're looking at a saga like Hrolf Saga Kraka or Egil Saga, where we have these figures who kind of really fall into this middle category between berserk and shapeshifter. But here we don't even know enough to know what about Viggy is so uncanny. All we know is that he scares Narfi, but let's face it, that's not hard to do.
No. Well, and here's part of the problem of the prose sections of this text, that they just nothing ever gets developed.
Right, exactly. So we're told that there's this shapeshifter in the room, and that he's moving to block Narfi at every angle, but then that's it.
Yeah.
That's all we know about it.
Let's get some shape-shifting in there, man.
Right. What's he shifting into, for example?
Yeah.
I'd like to know. If he's turning himself into a mouse, that's not so scary. But if he's turning himself into a bear, we have a problem. All right. So next, this is a favorite of mine just because of the variety of names.
Yeah.
Bersi. We've got Bersi the Dueller, a.k.a. Bleary-Eyed Bersi.
Wait a minute.
A.k.a. Arse Bersi.
You're not going to give him those other names, are you?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead.
Any one of them. Yeah, no, any one of these names is worthy of note on their own.
Only one of them's an actual nickname.
No, that's not true.
All right.
When Steingerd names him these things, she says that he's been called Blear-Eye Bersi.
Okay, I'll give you that one, but I'm not going to give you Arse Bersi.
She creates the nickname there on the spot. A rare moment when we see the nickname being created.
I don't know that it sticks.
All right, well, looking at them individually.
All right.
We'll take the ones that you accept first. We've said before that Dueller is a fairly badass name to carry around.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other two are obviously somewhat less complimentary. The first is an opaque reference to something about Bersi's eyes or vision, but the second is a clear insult meant to humiliate him, with a reference to his defeat in the duel with Kormak's uncle Steinar.
But it's not really a nickname so much as a name calling.
Well, it's a nickname. It's what his wife calls him. The name is bad enough on its own, but it's his own wife who crafts the name.
I get that. I get that.
And of course, with the sagas, we always have to consider the sexual connotations of a reference to a buttocks injury.
Yes.
So Bersi has a hard time of it, and even at the hands of his own wife. But he does collect an impressive array of pseudonyms.
Yes, he does.
Whether you accept Arse Bersi or not, he's still got the other two. Absolutely.
Arse Bersi is a hell of a nickname. I really like it.
It really is. It really is.
I just don't think it's an actual nickname.
Well, I think I'm going to put it in there.
I'm sure Bersi would appreciate that. That's part of why his wife is divorcing him.
Poor guy. No respect. Thorkel the Tooth Gnasher.
Oh, I love him.
This is a great name, and I really like the way it's introduced. We're told in the saga that Thorkel is the son of Thorkel of Tunga, and he was known as the Tooth Gnasher. Mm-hmm. Somehow that line makes it even better. The Tooth Gnasher, not just Tooth Gnasher. The name Tangjoster might also translate as Tooth Grinder, which is actually the name of one of Thor's chariot goats.
Oh, wow.
So it's an interesting connection there. It's also the nickname in this saga most likely to be used by a Scandinavian death metal band. Tooth Gnasher or Tooth Grinder is definitely, you can hear that.
Yeah, Tooth Gnasher is good. With the Thor's goats thing, does this mean we can cut Thorkel up and have him for dinner, and then in the morning he'll be fine as long as we keep all his bones together?
Just don't split the bones.
Yeah. Nice. All right, what's next?
It's a little Utgard Loki reference for those of you who are up on your Norse mythology. Mm-hmm. Next is Onan Sioni. Onan Sioni shows up in a number of sagas. The name Sioni means eyesight, probably with the connotation here of keen-sighted or something like it.
Not bleary-eyed.
Yeah. No, he's a pretty important figure, and we'll see him and his family cropping up in other sagas, but he's not terribly, terribly important in this one. Olaf the Peacock, who we've seen before. The name suggests a man who struts about, but we've always, I think you and I have both read this the same way, that it carries the connotation of a flashy dresser.
Yeah.
Now, we know that several figures in the sagas make a point of returning to Iceland after successful trips abroad wearing these rainbow-dyed cloaks. And there seems to have been a trend among some Icelanders to wear deliberately eye-watering clothes. Mm-hmm. So perhaps Peacock means not how he carries himself, but what he wears.
Yeah, I think that's true.
We have Thorvald Tintin.
Tintin?
Tin Block is the literal translation, but this name almost certainly means that he's a smith of some sort.
And presumably dirty and smelly, according to the way Cormac likes to play with him.
Right. Now, Cormac actually twists his nickname around and calls him Tin Biter in his verse, which I read as an insulting comparison to the Shield Biter as a euphemism for a warrior or a berserk. Right? So a Tin Biter rather than a Shield Biter.
Right.
Meaning that he sort of is not a man of war. He's a man of the smith.
Yeah, and he's weak, obviously. And he plays that out. Thorvald is weak and can't really do anything.
Right. It's actually Thorvald's brother who has to go into battle against Cormac. Thorin the Mighty. If you have to have a nickname, you can do a lot worse than the Mighty.
Yeah.
But this particular Mighty, Thorin, doesn't come across as mighty in anything but attitude in this saga. Mm-hmm. Remember, he and his sons are taken out by Bersi pretty easily. And finally, we have Osmund Ashsides.
Yeah, I like this one. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what it means. What is Ashsides?
Well, a name like Ashsides is usually it's usually a compliment to a warrior's toughness or his ability to fight unscathed.
Is it?
So Ironside, well, it's ash as in ash wood.
Okay.
A very hard, almost metallic wood.
Right.
Not ash as in fire ash.
Okay, good.
So Ironsides has a similar connotation, right? Bjorn Ironsides, son of Ragnar.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth pointing out, though, that Osmund takes part in 2 fights in this saga. He loses both of them.
Oops.
And loses a leg to Cormac's father, Ogmund. So it may be more about a boast than an earned reputation in this case.
Well, it could precede what happens in this saga. I don't know.
Well, sure.
Well, did you know?
So what do you think?
Did you know that Ashmund Ashside's son is featured in Njal Saga? Just briefly.
This is the same son who features in Cormac Saga, or a different one?
Well, Cole, his son Cole he's called a.
Oh, so it's a different son.
Yeah, he's called. It just says he's a Viking. He's the son of Ashmund Ashsides from Småland, and then it goes on and it features in this
Nicely
episode.
done. Nice bit of saga linking.
Yeah, there you go. So, for this one, I lean very heavily towards Tooth Gnasher. It's just a cool name.
Yeah, I like Tooth Gnasher, and that's one of my 2. I'm going to also put Bersi up there.
Yeah, I know you want to do
Bersi the Dueller, and Blair Eye Bersi, and Arse Bersi.
Well, as a very bleary-eyed individual myself, I don't condone the making fun or the belittling of vision problems.
I'm sorry, wasn't that exactly your rationale behind why my choice of Gris Simonsen as a thingman was a bad choice? Because of his poor eyesight? You mocked me for choosing a nearsighted man as a thingman.
This is an entirely new episode, so my stance is going to be completely different. So,
oh my goodness!
So let's give it to Tooth Gnasher.
You know what? Because he's called the Tooth Gnasher, and because of that link that he shares a name with one of the goats of Thor.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go for this one.
It's a great one. Congratulations,
I
Thorkel.
do enjoy Arse Bersi, but yeah, Thorkel Tooth Gnasher. Well done.
Yeah, I'd hate to sleep next
I look
to him.
forward. Well, I look forward to hearing his first album. Notable witticisms. All right, so now we have to look at some of the better lines in the saga. We're looking for clever lines and bits of repartee. So, Andy, why don't you start us off? Repartee.
Well, I can't think of anything more fun than the Love Hare's Island poem of Cormac.
Oh dear.
And Narfi's dirty verses with
the sausage verses?
The erect spears.
Oh yes, the false
the
verse.
poem about Steingerd.
Yes. Those are funny, but I'm going to say that they're not actually witty verses.
What?
The Love Hare's Island is just sexually crude. It's not especially
True.
witty. And it isn't clever because it just gets him into trouble. It doesn't really, it doesn't cut any ice at all. If anything, it just ices things up further.
Oh my goodness.
And
You're no
Narfi's
fun.
verse, as we said in the episode, what it stands out for is actually being fairly bad poetry. Right? It's just sort of stupidly done. In fact, Cormac is cruder in his own verses than what's being used to slander him here, but he's a better poet.
Yeah.
And so
my
argument is that he's actually offended more by being slandered with having written a bad verse than by the sexual crudity of the verse.
All right, fine. You're not going to let them through, so get on with your first pick.
Well, okay, so I'm looking at things that are a little bit clever, right? So I will include some of Cormac's poetry.
Oh, well, how convenient.
And, well, specifically, I'm going to look at the 17th verse of the poem, when Cormac is talking about having heard that the sons of Thorveig the Witch are lying in wait for him.
Mm-hmm.
And when Steingerd warns him, he responds with this verse. Sitting indoors and sharpening swords is what they are doing. My enemies, sons of one churl, they will never be my slayers. And if those two attack me on my own, on an open plain, it'll be like ewes seeking the life of a savage wolf.
Mm.
I
nicely
like
done.
that. That is nice.
Under pressure, coming up with something so witty.
And to come up with ewes seeking the life of a wolf, that's nice.
Yeah.
And of course, he then proceeds to kill them both. So this is not merely boasting.
No. It's good stuff.
What do you got?
One might even think that the narrative was created around the poem.
One might think that.
One might, yes.
With fairly solid ground.
something very similar, another verse. This one I think is, I hope you'll qualify it as witty. It's the sausage verse.
Whose? Narfi's or Kormak's?
No, this is Kormak. So if you remember, they were sitting there cooking suet and sausage and stuff like that, and Narfi starts picking on Kormak for being in love with Steingerd. And I think he shoves some sausages in his face, right?
Right, and he says in his own sort of bad versification, "As for the snakes of the cauldron, Kormak, what do you reckon?"
Yeah, I love that voice. I don't think it's appropriate, but
Narfi deserves no better.
I know you do. So Kormak is kind of offended, and he composes a couple verses after striking Narfi on the back with his axe. Just the side of the axe, not the sharp part. Anyway, the verse that I like is, "A cow's inquisitive feeder asked me how I liked pot snakes. Red round the eyelids he seems to me from time spent at home in the kitchen. I know that grimy no-gooder, that bruiser with filthy matted hair, the one who manured the home fields, was treated like a bitch and beaten." Oh,
jeez.
It's probably one of the better insult poems of all Saga literature.
But it does, I mean, once again, we see that Kormak he's a really kind of harsh, crude individual when in his poetry.
Yeah. But he's damn good at it.
Oh, absolutely. No, he's devastating, but not a man to mince words.
Sure. Now, do you have anything that's not a verse?
I do actually. This is I think we actually cited this one during our reading of the episode. But it's worth noting again. Steingerd, when she's sort of long since gotten over Kormak and just finds him to be irritating and frustrating at this point. This is the night that they spend sleeping on either side of a wooden partition when Kormak is creating vulgar verses, including the Love Hair Island verse. Mm-hmm. And she tells him, that it would be better if they never saw each other again. In the morning, Kormak made ready to leave, sought out Steingerd, and took a gold ring from his hand, meaning to give it to her. She said, "May the trolls take every bit of you and your gold ring."
Your readings are hilarious.
I like that line.
I just like your woman's voice. It's hilarious.
What's wrong with my woman's voice?
I imagine you going to bed with your wife like that. It's very freaky. Anyway, I want to give Steingerd some props too, and I'm surprised you didn't choose this one. It's right when she's setting up her divorce to she's setting up her divorce to Bersi. Bersi's laying there kind of immobile. He's not able to move around too much, injured as he is. And it says she wished to divorce him, and when she was ready to leave, she went to Bersi and said, "You were the first known."
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, I'm going to try.
That's...
"You were first known as Bleary-eyed Bersi, and then as Bersi the Dueller. But now you may in truth be called Arse Bersi." And she declared herself separated from him.
You never get to make fun of my women's voices again.
I was just trying to do what you did.
I prefer to go for the Kids in the Hall female voices, not the Monty Python female voices that you tend to prefer.
Well, different strokes.
All right, so those are all good. I've got one more.
Okay.
And I just want to... this is just a sort of throwaway line, but I enjoy it a great deal. Mm-hmm. We talked about the ridiculously complicated rules for wielding the sword Skofnung.
Oh, that's right.
Kormak gains from Skeggi. And he gets these instructions, and Skeggi's instructions are, a pouch goes with the sword, but you are to leave it alone. The sun is not to shine on the pommel of the sword hilt, and you are not to wield the sword unless you're getting ready for combat. But if you do find yourself on a battlefield, sit by yourself and draw it there. Hold out the sword blade in front of you, and blow on it. Then a little snake will crawl out from under the hilt. Turn the sword sideways and make it possible for him to crawl back under the hilt. Kormak said, "What will you sorcerers think of next?"
I love that.
I actually I like the responding line from Skeggi. This kind of defensive line. "Well, that's exactly what will happen."
It's great. That's the winner. It's got to be the winner.
What will you sorcerers think of next?
Yeah,
it summarizes what every one of my students thinks after reading one of the more supernatural sagas.
Right. It was just such a perfect response. Yeah. All right. Congratulations, Kormak. You won something.
Congratulations. Outlawry. All right. This is one of my favorite times in the judgment section. This is our chance to kick out one of the people who've been driving me nuts.
That's why you're just a cruel person. You like to send people off, punish them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Vote them off the island. And as you know, I am licking my lips in anticipation of this episode's outlawry. But I'm going to let you start it off.
Okay, well, I imagine that you're going to want to outlaw, or at least make a case for outlawing Kormak.
Well, Kormak.
Of course, you always do.
Okay.
You're always like, who might Andy choose as his thingman? Let's eliminate him as quick as possible.
I think it's always interesting when we eliminate the eponymous figure.
The titular character?
The titular character, yes.
In this case, I don't think we do.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he commits a number of, we could call moral crimes, if not, violations of law.
He's defending what's his.
He is, as we said in the summary section, he is the most flagrant and frequent violator of the Icelandic law against creating verses about another man's wife.
He certainly is. Hardly
40 some odd verses about another man's wife. In fact, 2 other men's wives, because they're both Steingerd.
That's right, yeah. He is kind of relentless in his pursuit, but let me ask you this. If we outlaw him, who's left to choose for thingman?
Not my problem. We'll deal with that problem when we get to thingman.
Okay.
He's also, remember, he doesn't show up at the marriage, and as a result, he gets sued for dishonoring Steingerd and her family.
Big deal.
Oh, well, all right then.
I'm not one to outlaw heroes.
Oh, well.
Especially famous ones.
I would question whether Kormak is all that famous a hero, but all right. I'm going to let it go because I already know. I've already got.
Yeah, I know.
A heat-seeking missile sighted on somebody else.
So
So you go ahead and nominate somebody.
I figured we could sneak this one through. So I'll nominate Thorveig, the witch. Now, she causes all kinds of problems.
Yes.
And she's a sorceress, which, always is worthy of outlawry, or at least slaying her, or putting a bag over her head and pushing her off a cliff.
Although, in this case, you don't have to do that, because he just finds her fetch and shoots it.
That's right, yeah. I just picture this big, dumpy woman just waddling around with her big teeth.
That's the walrus.
I know, we said that that's what's inside of her, so.
Oh, dear.
Anywho.
Yeah, and I think you can make an argument for Thorveig, but it's not a terribly compelling argument. I mean, she's...
Yeah, Thorveig is a decent candidate. The only problem with outlawing Thorveig is that she's just trying to make up for her sons being killed, and she gets no compensation. She's bullied about.
Right. Well, remember, we've seen this before. If you remember in Erbigge Saga, we had Thorgrima Witchface, who lost her 2 sons to Bjorn, the Bredvik champion, and then cast spells, including a blizzard. She called up a blizzard to try to kill Bjorn. We never even considered her for outlawry.
No.
Right? Because we considered that she had a very good reason for what she was doing. Now, Thorveig is an objectionable person, but there's justifications for, most of her actions, especially her actions against Kormak.
Yeah.
And I suppose she does sell him a leaky boat at one point, which, I don't really know if that's criminal.
But why wouldn't she?
Right, exactly. Now, I'm going to say that Thorveig is probably not a terribly good candidate. And in any case, she pales in comparison to Narfi.
Now, to be fair, what does Narfi do other than stir up trouble? I mean, if you're interested in outlawing people who stir up trouble, take your own thingman Snorri Gothi and knock him out of the island, huh?
I can't outlaw him. He's already one of my thingmen.
No, you can outlaw whoever you want.
No. I'm very comfortable with my thingman. And your shameless jealousy is really it's icing on my cake, by the way.
I just turned completely against him.
No, Narfi is guilty of, let's see, what crimes can we lay at his foot? Aside from him just being an odious human being. He composes slanderous verses.
Sure.
Technically about another man's wife, even though it's with the consent of the husband.
Yeah, exactly.
He does actually compose a slanderous verse about somebody else's wife. Now, of course, Kormak is guilty of that 4 dozen times over, so maybe we can't outlaw Narfi just for that.
There you go.
But he's also guilty of inciting people into feud violence.
Kormak actually does feud violence.
Yes, but he's incited into it by Narfi.
Okay. So it never would happen if Narfi
right.
was there. No, yeah, Narfi's the one that sets that whole wedding up, that false
right,
wedding.
exactly.
Right?
He establishes all kinds of problems. He's essentially responsible for every conflict, or at least the origins of every conflict in the saga. Because we see, for example, with Bersi, a series of duels that come about, but they germinate from the fact that he's married to a woman that Kormak still thought of as his.
Yeah, up until his death, almost everything comes from Narfi in this.
Yeah,
saga.
no, absolutely. In spite of the fact that every plan he comes up with is woefully incompetent.
Yeah. Well, I should say, if you let him through, no, I'm just joking. I would never take him as my thingman. Although it would be nice to have a guy that kind of...
Although he'd fit in very nicely with some of your other men. So.
Really? No, I just imagine the fun of kicking him and making fun of him, and it'd be a good morale boost for my men.
There you go.
He
could be your gimp.
Yeah. And plus we could have him do dumb things and go over to your camp and compose verses about you, maybe piss in your pot.
Right, run in and slap sausages at us.
Yes, exactly.
I think because of the amount of blood that's spilled due to him.
Yeah.
I think Narfi needs to go.
Yeah.
Also, I really want to outlaw him.
All right, I will agree. Let's outlaw Narfi. Can it be minor outlawry? Because he's not like a great criminal who's guilty of killing people.
You know what? I'm going to allow minor outlawry just because, he's not guilty of any major crimes. I don't think he's worth major outlawry.
No.
I want to give him minor outlawry. I'm betting that he's going to get himself killed during the 3 years of minor outlawry somewhere overseas, thus sparing me the trouble of having to kill him when he gets back.
Okay, that's good.
All right.
So he gets a timeout.
Thingman.
I think the gods usually favor you in the coin toss and the arrangement of the sagas that we've got. And this has happened once again. You won the sacred coin toss, and you will get to go first. Now, I know that there are no tricks up your sleeve this time. We are either choosing Kormak or Bersi the Dueller, right?
Are we?
Don't you raise your eyebrows at me, sir.
Well, okay. Certainly, Kormak and Bersi are the obvious choices. I mean, the three most central figures, apart from Steingerd herself, are Kormak, Bersi, and Thorvald Tintain. And I think we both agree that Tintain he's not Thingman material.
No.
Unless you're looking for somebody to make, sort of cheap metal trinkets for the rest of your Thingmen to wear around their necks while they go into battle. He's probably not your guy.
I'd rather have Henthor on my side.
That's saying quite a bit.
That is.
So certainly we can eliminate him right away.
Mm-hmm.
Kormak has a lot going for him, unquestionably.
Yeah.
He is, what we have to say, number 2, in terms of the most famous warrior poets of Iceland after Eöl Skallagrimsson.
Sure.
He's got a ton of well-known and well-regarded poetry associated with his name. This saga exists largely as a showcase for his poetry.
Yeah, it's basically constructed around that.
Right. So there's no question but that he is kind of he's the blue chip, he's the blue stock in this saga. But Bersi is an interesting figure. I mean,
he sure is.
The more you dig into the saga, the more you begin to realize he's ultimately a genuinely good person.
Yeah, and half the saga is about him.
Which is
weird.
With the obvious exception that he's a very, very violent man who's killed 36 people by the end of his life and seems pleased about it.
But like Greece, he's an old man. He's at the end of his career, end of his life.
Right, and at the end of a very successful career as a warrior, soldier, etc.
Yeah.
It's the old the line from True Lies. Have you killed a lot of people? Yeah, but they were all bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everyone Bersi kills, he seems to be justified in killing.
As far as we know, he's got 36 under his belt, so we don't know all of them.
So, of the ones we know, right, we don't see any killings that seem sort of unjustified.
Yeah.
Maybe, the death of his brother-in-law at the end of his life is a little arbitrary.
Yeah.
But, he's an old man. You gotta give him his whims. So I do like that he seems like a fairly honorable person when we speak to his introduction in the saga, and he specifically asks whether Steingerd has any other obligations to other men before he steps in to marry her.
Right.
It's Narfi who misleads him. Right?
Exactly.
The implication there being that he would not marry her if she were promised to another or if she were in love with someone else.
Right. And once he's given his word and everything like that, he's pretty much stuck with that marriage, even though he realizes that she wants nothing to do with him.
And when Kormak shows up and starts acting like an arse, as he does, he responds to that by saying, well, here's a solution to the problem. Why don't you marry my sister?
Yeah.
We can be friends.
Yeah.
We can be brothers-in-law, and that'll solve all the problems. That he thinks his way through a problem. He tries to find a peaceful solution, even with someone as notoriously difficult as Kormak.
Right.
So that's admirable.
Yeah.
There is a third option, that you're kind of discounting offhand, which is Steinar Onunderson.
Oh, he's fine.
Yeah, I mean, he's, comes from a good family. He's certainly famous in other sagas. He has a feud with one of Egil Skallagrimsson's sons. He comes from a good family. He's the son of Onunsioni. And he is, on record as being the only man to get the better of Bersi the Dueller in a duel.
Yeah, old Bersi. And it's also, kind of happenstance as the sword glances off the shield. It's not like
Nevertheless,
he was victorious for his strength or,
look, Kormak loses a duel with Bersi because a piece of sword nicks his thumb.
Yeah.
Technicalities, and it's a game of inches, the duel.
You're not picking Steinar, so why don't you get to it? Who are you taking here?
I'm just saying that there is a third very viable option in this saga.
Just spin those wheels.
I really like Kormak and I really like Bersi, both of them. I think they're both great figures. I don't think there's a terrible choice.
No,
right? I actually think the coin has favored you in this case because in this saga there are two very clear choices. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that's going to be true in our next episode when you get to pick first.
No.
But for right now, I feel like, I've been choosing a lot of prominent men, famous men. I've been choosing men because of the weight of their names. I feel like I want to start patronizing the arts.
Okay.
I need to start, thinking about my legacy.
All right.
I need a man who's going to compose poetry about what a great lord I am. And so I will be taking Kormak, the poet.
That's a good, reasonable choice. I've got myself some poets. I'm okay.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm short on poets so far.
Yeah. Well, I will disregard all the nice things I have composed for myself about Kormak.
Did you really think you were gonna have a shot at him?
I didn't know because Bersi's a great, he is. I mean, here's the thing: as far as a thingman who I want to be, helping me, serving me, working with me, Kormak isn't really that guy. He likes to stare at the ocean and compose poetry about his girl that doesn't want him. And then when he gets near her, he likes to compose dirty poetry that pushes her farther away.
Oh, let me be straight about this. I'm choosing Kormak as my thingman. I would not leave him alone with my wife.
Okay, good. Well, he's not interested in your wife. He's interested in Steingerd.
It's true. He's a one other man's wife man.
Yeah. So, Bersi. I'm going to choose Bersi. He's the dueler. So, come on, man. That's like the best thing you can have as a thing, man. He can help me get out of trouble whenever I need him. His socioeconomic status isn't so great that I have to really worry about him rising up to challenge me, which I think is a nice thing. He may not be the Varangian guardsman that you got in Greece, Samingson. Yeah. But he's also better than Greece in a lot of ways.
Oh, how dare you.
He's a cool guy. Even in his old age, he gets a lot of stuff done. And you can't say that for old Greece.
I also can't ever say that anyone called him Arse Greece.
Because nobody cares about Greece. He's like a non-entity. You might as well have chosen Tintin. Wow. Now, Bersi, even in his old age, holds his own in battle. He forges alliances with Iceland's elite like Olaf Peacock, and he's not even a bad poet to boot. So he's a good guy. Nephew of Hoskell, the rather famous and well-to-do ally of King Haakon. So in all, I think I could do much worse than Bersi for Thingman. I'm quite pleased.
And I have no doubt that you will in the future.
All right, so Bersi for me, Kormak for John.
Excellent.
Final rating.
Final ratings. It's time for us to judge the saga, John. We've put it on trial. We've heard all the cases. We've outlawed Narfi. We've chosen our Thingmen.
Thank God.
What are we going to rate this most famous saga? A saga that is taught quite frequently.
It is, actually.
For what reason, I don't know.
Although I've never actually taught it.
No, me neither. And I don't plan to.
Huh. So what's up with that? All right, so should I go first?
Yeah, why don't you go first? What are you going to give it?
All right, I'm going to keep this relatively short and sweet.
Yeah, right.
I can remember reading Kormak in grad school and just being completely at sea and frustrated for most of its length.
And then you learned to
Kormak
read.
Well, right. It was a shame. I kept looking for the pictures. Kormak keeps dropping out of the narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a near complete cast change halfway through the saga. Weird bits of continental influence are scattered around. And ultimately, for me, Cormac's refusal to marry Steingerd makes him look less like the tortured victim of a witch's spell than a snotty son of privilege refusing to get serious with a social inferior's daughter. Now, I tracked down my notes from that first reading of the saga, and they are angry. I'm going to lie to you.
Well, that's part of the time of your life, too.
Well, fair enough. So I didn't enter into this one full of hope and anticipation, but I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed myself this time around. William Sayers has said that the poet sagas rely on what he calls fracture effects for their dramatic weight, on the disruptive quality of the poet in his social world, as well as the disruption of the prose narrative with poetic verse, which is nice. Maybe I'm just developing a greater appreciation for that sort of thing as I'm getting older.
Like Greece?
Maybe like Ale Skallagrimsson,
Okay.
I'm eager for ways to shake society's foundations.
Oh, well.
Anytime I can compare myself to Ale, I will.
Okay.
I'm also prematurely balding. And a homely fellow. Please cut that out. Whatever the reason, I remain skeptical of Kormak as a saga figure, even though I chose him, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I like him as a poet figure. But as a saga figure, he's still problematic. But I'm much more impressed by Steingerd, by Bersi, and by the saga writer.
Yeah, me too.
Who I now think is doing a really nifty job of mediating the expectations of a saga audience while exploring some not very saga-y story elements. So I was going to give this a 7, but even on the second reading, I have to dock at half a point for the total randomness of Cormac's death by Scottish Giant. So 6.5. That's my rating.
Really? A 6.5 for this thing?
Yep.
That feels awfully generous, John. And I think
All right, go for
you're
it.
even admitting in your rating the flaws of this, and we've talked about the flaws of this, so I'll just keep going with it. I wonder if I'd feel the same way about my hatred for this thing, although maybe I shouldn't say hatred. Hatred's a little strong. But
Now you can't ever teach it. Your students will hear this.
But frustration and disappointment is, I think, an appropriate thing. But if we had recorded this the same night that we did our summary, when I had just read the thing, maybe I would feel a little bit differently. Because I think when I read it again, I liked it quite a bit. And now, as time has passed and I've got a little distance from it, I don't like it all that much. To be honest, I don't know how this saga earns more than a 5. It's like a total mess.
Well, I just told you.
No, it doesn't work. I mean, sometimes this saga gets a pass despite its obvious narrative flaws simply because it was once thought to be a very early example of family saga literature. But that saga theory doesn't hold up as well as it once did. And so I'm just going to judge it on its own merits. Now, I can appreciate some of the complexity of the issues at play in this saga. And I think it's perhaps useful for discussing marriage and women's place in Icelandic society. But I don't think it's a very effectively wrought story. And as much as I love Bersi, that whole section of the narrative just doesn't fit. It's like the saga is written as a biography of Kormak, but we don't really have enough material to work with. And so we insert this whole Bersi section to kind of flesh things out a little bit. It's a saga that's loosely constructed around this series of poems that they had lying around. And here, for me, is the biggest problem. The prose, the narrative of the poem doesn't always read the poetry properly. And I'll talk a little bit about that in our saga brief on Skaldic poetry, but for now I want to use this very, very good example. In the long section, the Bersi section, we find an interesting and kind of funny poem, presumably composed by Bersi himself. This is verse 48 on page 42 of the Sagas of the Warrior Poets. In the context of this saga, it just doesn't make sense. The poem reads like this, and the context is that Bersi's hanging out with his foster son Halldor. This is the son of Olaf Peacock. And there's a line about how Halldor doesn't like how Bersi manages his property. And after that, Bersi spoke a verse. Both of us lie on a bench together, Halldor and I, unable to move. Youth does this to you, and old age to me. You've hope of better things, but I, none at all. And Halldor said, I don't like Vali, which is kind of funny. Here's the point. That poem doesn't make any sense. What's he talking about? Halldor can't move, and they're both lying on their backs on a bench. Now, if you go and read Laxdala Saga, you'll find this same poem. You'll find Bersi, once again the foster father of Halldor, but in that case, Halldor is an infant. And there it starts to make sense. You have a very, very old man lying on the ground, and a very, very young man, an infant lying on the ground, and neither of them can quite move. Now, whoever wrote this saga doesn't seem to get that that's probably or most likely what's going on in the poem. They just invent this crazy thing or just jam the poem in. And for that kind of reason...
Because the narrative requires that Halldor be capable of helping Bersi with his final act of violence.
Exactly. So it's
so he can't be an infant in this saga.
He can't. But they're like, I have this poem about Bersi and Halldor, so I'm going to use it. I just don't know how or where to put it in. So there's a lot of examples like that. It's just poorly constructed, John. It's not very good. And there's so much better examples. If you're looking for all the things that this text offers, go read Hallfred's Saga. Go read one of the other ones that we've done. They're just better. They offer the same stuff and more. So with that in mind, I'm going to give this like a 4.5.
All right.
Okay.
So that's a 4.5 from Andy, a 6.5 from me. So what is that? A total of 11.
11.
So that's pretty middle of the road.
That's right.
But feel free to tell us why we're wrong, or more to the point, why Andy's wrong. And you can do that on any of our many social media. Andy, take it away.
Yeah, as always, we do appreciate your support, and you can keep in touch with us and give us your responses or reactions on Facebook or Twitter. And be sure to rate our podcast on iTunes to help promote the podcast some more. Now, we'll be back after the holidays with a new episode. It's either going to be a saga brief on skaldic poetry or the penultimate warrior poet saga, Bjorn, the champion of the Hitadal people. Now, until then, stay warm and cozy.
Bye for now.
Do you know what that sound is?
Kormak?
Those are the shrieking eels. If you don't believe me, just wait. They always grow louder when they're about to feed on human flesh.